So I'm not going to sit here and tell you like, oh, it was harder in my day. I walked a mile to school barefoot each way in snow, but this too shall pass. And, I'm not a particularly spiritual guy, but, I think that you don't get assigned work that you are not capable of doing. And you don't get saddled with a challenge that you are not capable of overcoming. You just need to figure out the path. And if you view it as a challenge that you need to kind of rise to, uh, then it's a lot easier to deal with these things, right? I mean, I thought it was incredibly unfair that I got blown up. It was incredibly unfair to my master sergeant who was killed. It was incredibly unfair to the major, the two captains and the two sergeants who were wounded, and the petty officer first class who's now a senior chief petty officer and received the Silver Star for his actions that day. It was unfair to all of us. And I still wouldn't change a thing about that because it made me who I am today. Those challenges, as hard as they were, I mean, let me rephrase that. I would do anything to have my master sergeant back. I would do anything for him to be alive 9 months from his retirement date and get to have the life that he deserved in retirement. But in terms of the things that I did, you got to forgive yourself and you got to figure it out. And maybe it takes a lot of maturity. Maybe it takes a lot of stubbornness. Uh, Maybe it takes a lot of bourbon. You figure it out, right? But you go on that journey and you know that you're not going to give up, right? You're not going to quit.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Post-Military Podcast. If you're new here, welcome. I'm very happy you decided to stop by. This podcast is designed to help individuals transition from one major chapter of their life to another. And right now, we're specifically focusing on moving from the military and into the civilian world. My guest today is Gabe Sgangas. Gabe was a Marine artillery officer who moved into cyber warfare after being injured while deployed overseas, and now has worked in multiple tech companies that provide products to the defense sector. In this episode, we talk about his time in the Marines, his transition out of the Marines, and what he's done to rebuild his identity after separating himself from the military. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to listen, and I hope you enjoy the episode.
Solemnly swear
Do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend
that I will support and defend
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Post-Military Podcast. I'm your host, Billy, and today with me is a friend and mentor of mine, Gabe. Gabe, welcome to the podcast.
Billy, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited. For all of you history buffs out there, you might already be able to deduce from Gabe's background that he is, in fact, a Marine. Or I guess, well, you don't even say ex-Marine, right? That's like, that's always and forever.
That's reserved for people like Lee Harvey Oswald.
I love that. Gabe, could you please just lay out for everybody your time in the military and what you did while you were in service?
Yeah, absolutely. So I joined the Marine Corps. I actually dropped out of law school. It was the best decision I ever made in my life. I joined the Marine Corps a little later. I commissioned 3 days before my 26th birthday. I knew that I wanted to serve. It took me a little bit longer to get there. Growing up in New York, I was a sophomore in college on 9/11. And the University of Albany, where I went to school, I lived in one of the residential towers. Those 4 towers were used as a catching feature by the hijackers who flew the planes out of Boston to know when to turn into the Hudson River Valley to head south towards lower Manhattan. And that affected me. Growing up in the suburbs of New York City, I knew people who worked in the towers. I remember being outside on the day that the 93 bombing happened and we heard it. And it was something that kind of stuck with me. And I knew that this was kind of my generation's struggle. And when it was my time and I was ready, I went. And I commissioned into the Marine Corps as a field artillery officer. I spent my time in Quantico. I moved on to Lawton, Oklahoma. And I spent time in cannon batteries, in the cannon battalion. And then I moved into cyberspace operations. So I built out the first couple of offensive cyberspace mission teams for the Marine Corp. At that point, I'd gotten hurt pretty badly in 2012. Had gotten a little bit too close to a suicide bomber in Eastern Afghanistan, and it was time to go. I think when it's time, it's time. And I was on the downslope, looked like shit, felt like shit, wasn't taking care of myself, was taking care of Marines and taking care of the mission. And I had a couple of officers who said, hey, it's time for you to go take care of you. You're going to go through this process. And I was medically retired in 2018. And it was kind of like a jarring process because my wife is still active duty. I retired on the 27th of February, 2018. She deployed to Afghanistan on the 25th of February. So I was closing one chapter as she opened another and went to an intermediate logistics base where I spent my deployment at in 2012. But when you don't have an option about how and when you go, it's a little bit different, right? It's one thing to look at the transition and say, hey, I'm ready for a change. It's another thing to look at the transition and say, well, I can continue to wear the uniform in a permanent limited duty status, or I can go and, fight from a different position and continue my life in the civilian world, which is what I chose to do. Hard decision to make, but when the decision is made for you that, I was never going to go back to cannon artillery. I was never going to go to rocket artillery. I could do cyber and they would keep me around, but that was really the extent of the career. So when I retired, I started looking for opportunities that were kind of geographically focused. And the way that I approached this process was to think about, all right, my wife is stationed in DC. She's deploying, she's going forward, but she's stationed in DC and will be for probably another 18 to 24 months. How do I stake out my next thing? Build skills that are transferable, that are tangible, and be able to be a economically viable part of my marriage. In a situation where I didn't really know that I was going to be a rock star. When I got hurt, I had no penetrative trauma, thank God. The bomb that hurt me killed one of my Marines and seriously wounded 3 others and an Afghan local policeman. But I just had blast trauma and compressive trauma, being lifted up and slammed down. So you've got a little bit of like the wounded imposter syndrome too, where you're being medically retired. You're 100% permanent and total disabled. I've got 11 levels of dysfunction, crushed discs in my cervical and my lumbar spine, and a pretty serious brain injury that impacted my speech patterns, the speed with which I spoke, my ability to play guitar. I lost all the dexterity in my fingers. But if you talked to me and you engaged with me, you would never know that. So it's kind of like what's wrong with this guy? Is he just looking for a ticket? But as I worked through all of that and I knew that it was time for me to go, I wanted to make sure that, number one, I stayed with the mission. I was not fully done with the national security mission. I loved what I did in cannon artillery. It was incredible. The Marines were incredible and the mission was fantastic. I loved what I did in cyber almost more. It was one of those opportunities that I think, as a young man, I grew up and I was like, man, I love secrets. What's going on behind this door? What is actually happening in foreign policy? And I would love to see that. And I got the opportunity to do that working at Fort Meade. And I wanted to stay in that space when I transitioned. But knowing that I didn't want to go on the risk scale too extreme, I wanted to transition into something that was relatively known, where my credentials that I already had would be valuable and would be things that would open doors for me, as well as being in a position where, I could build skills that if my wife got orders, which they're called orders, they're not options, you pick up and you move, that I would be portable with her, right? I knew that I wanted to build skills that if she got sent to the postgraduate school to get a PhD, that I could go run up the road to, San Jose to Silicon Valley somewhere and go be a software program manager. So those were the jobs that I started to target. Um, and the way that I did my targeting was to just draw this like giant range ring around DC with Annapolis, which is where we live at the center, and figure out what is like the most outlandish, brutal commute that I could bear. And then just start to plot all of the different companies that did defense tech, national security stuff that were within that space, that were in the software sphere. Along the way, I was introduced to Breakline. At the time, Breakline Education had one vertical, and their focus was on transitioning veterans from the military into technology. And the whole premise was veterans are a underrepresented group within the technology sphere. You look out at Silicon Valley and all these companies, and the veteran employer resource groups were very small back then. And Breakline has since grown from just focusing on veterans to focusing on Mavens is another one of their verticals, which is focused on women. They've also got Apex, which is focused on Black, Indigenous, people of color, another kind of diverse background. And then the final Breakline vertical that I think is going to be announced, but I may be like breaking the news here, is focused on bringing people with disabilities into the tech sector. And the beauty of this is, now that I've got some distance between my transition and, successful time in the private sector, I know how crucial it is to build a diversity, equity, and inclusion hiring pipeline. Not just because the Department of Labor says so, but because in doing so, you create a kaleidoscope of lenses. And the diversity of viewpoints is really powerful. It makes teams better. It makes outcomes for customers better. And it was just one of those things that I felt really strongly about. And having the opportunity to go to Breakline, I think I was in the second or third cohort. We spent 2 or 3 weeks in the Bay Area. We went to all these different companies, and we had the opportunity to really immerse ourselves in the culture for at least a half day. I think the first day I spent the entire day at LinkedIn, and I had ridden the elevator up in the morning with the CEO, and it was like such a surreal experience for me. Here I was, I'm like this terrified transitioning military officer who's like, am I going to be economically viable? Like all these jobs that Breakline had on offer were in the Bay Area. Am I going to have to take a remote job? Is that, that's pretty scary. But I got the opportunity to meet people, and they were people who wanted to give me a hand up, not a handout, but they wanted to get to know us, broaden their own perspectives, and find ways to introduce more diversity of perspective into their business areas. And Breakline was incredible. So Breakline for me was kind of the final march up. It was the last mile, so to speak. Prior to that, I had worked with a group called the Commit Foundation, and the Commit Foundation shaped so much of my transition kind of mindset. Number one, the Commit Foundation was founded as a nonprofit. It's a different entity. They're different things. The Commit Foundation is really focused on helping veterans find their meaning. So you had a bunch of tier 1 spouses who looked at their husbands and said, what the heck are these guys going to do when they're not like flying to the X, sometimes twice a night, and kicking indoors and taking out bad guys? How are they going to find something that's like meaningful to them? How are they going to find something to do in the second phase of their career? Are they just going to be unfulfilled? And they set about designing this curriculum to help people think about how do you really design your life? And it resonated with me so much. And it really changed the way that I thought about, my future and my second career. Thinking through the questions that were posed to me, the one that blew my mind the most was, what time do you want to get out of bed in the morning? And I was like, never thought about that. I wake up when the sun comes up, when I got a PT, before I got to be at formation or whatever the thing is. Like there was always a place I had to be. And it struck me. And the realization I came to was that designing your life means You get to pick and choose these things. Do you want to walk your kids to the bus stop? Do you want to drop them off at school? Do you love waking up, having a cup of coffee in your underwear, putting on pants, and then walking the dog? You can do those things. You can build your life around the things that are truly important to you, and you don't have to adhere to what anybody else says the right way is, right? If you want a specific job and you have like a really narrow kind of scoping of this is what I got to do, you're limited. But if you leave those options open and you think about, hey, these are my non-negotiables, uh, you really get to a place that's fascinating. For me, I knew that I never wanted to be in a job where anybody ever looked at me again and said, "Where's Gabe?" Uh, I loved 95% of the people that I worked for in the Marine Corps, uh, probably a higher percentage of the people who I worked with. But I played workplace chicken with all of them. And it's a toxic trait. I admit to it. It's something that I work really hard to not do and to set the example of having like, maybe not a balance, because I don't think work-life balance exists, but work-life integration, the ability to do things that are enriching professionally and personally and make me a well-rounded person. And for me, what that actually translated to and working with my commit coach was understanding that I was looking for a high trust job. I was looking for a role where the assumption was you hire the right people, you hire for culture, and those people will be where they're supposed to be. And wherever they are is where the highest impact point as they've assessed it is. And if you've hired correctly and the people are properly motivated and people are, focused on the mission, you'll wind up in a place that makes sense. And you'll develop and deliver outcomes for customers that really are, at the end of the day, like what we want to do. I think the military is a customer service organization. It's why so many folks get out and are like, ugh, customer success, like customer success manager makes a ton of sense to me because I know how to understand complex topics and kind of grok what the heck is happening in like a complex software ecosystem if you end up in a SaaS company. And they can translate that to layman, right? It's just like talking to your commander and explaining why the digital fire control loop in your M777 155 millimeter cannon system isn't working. And you're like, dude, it's solar flares, man, right? You need to be able to actually break that down and say, hey, the ePlars cloud isn't working. And it's because the 117 Foxtrot radio keeps losing its fill. And we've called these people and this is what we're doing, and explaining and managing expectation. It's a very direct transition and translation of skills. And what I got in those kind of life design mentorship sessions and in all of the finding your meaning workshops with Commit was that I have a lot of like tangible skills, and those tangible skills are meaningful, right? But they may not be the most marketable thing. And the question then was, how do I commoditize? How do I monetize? How do I take the things that I just instinctively do, like take care of the people on my team, make sure that like I walk around and see, the NCOs and double check, like, hey, have all the boys and girls, have they all gotten chow, right? Is everybody eating? Is everybody getting paid? Is anybody having trouble at home? The things that you instinctively do that you think about and you're like, oh, this is management, this is leadership. Those things don't always translate to what you want to do in the civilian world. And finding your meaning is all about balancing this like imaginary risk scale, right? Everybody wants to go and join a startup and go public and get rich. And I can tell you that I've done a few of those things, not the getting rich part. It's another plug for why you should have a financial advisor and how important that is in your life to make good decisions with a professional guiding them. But I looked at the scale, and my wife grew up in a family where, they were pretty well off. Her dad worked hard, provided. He was in enterprise software sales, but she remembers those periods where he was between companies. And we're not talking about like got laid off. We're talking about, took a company public, was a successful like senior VP of sales, and you don't just roll right into the next job. You like play a little golf, you take 6 months, you find the right role, you find the right team, the right people, maybe somebody you know is building a team. But she remembers when her dad, who is a real ball buster, would be like, "Hey, there's no Christmas this year because it's not working." Uh, and she didn't want me to take that risk on of carrying a quota in a revenue producing role right out of the gate. And it was something, I've always been told that I could sell a ketchup popsicle to, someone wearing white gloves. And I don't know if that's a compliment or not. But I
I'm
loved
sorry.
it. I loved it.
That's
I
a
love
that's
to
a
talk to-
hilarious analogy. I've never heard that
I,
before.
I love to talk to people, and it made sense that whatever I did would be something that I interacted both internally and externally. Um, that was really important to me in shaping what I did next. And I wanted to land somewhere that balanced my wife's appetite for risk, where she looked at me and she was like, dude, you built a software program inside of Fort Meade. Worked across the agency, worked across Cyber Command, worked across Marfor Cyber, your higher headquarters, and all of these entities that didn't always see eye to eye, and you managed to deliver something that worked. I had no training. I had no experience as a software program manager. I knew how to operate software. I definitely didn't know how to build it, but I figured it out. And it was something that I looked at and said, all right, I've got a story to tell. And I see where you're going with this. And I think to myself, if you get orders to, California, I can pick up and go. And maybe if I have to leave national security, because at the time remote work was definitely not as prevalent as it was now in the pre-COVID era. But if I have to leave the national security world, if I don't have access to, a SCIF and contractors or a government job, things like that, how am I going to have the skills to be competitive with my peers who've been in this, this arena for their entire careers? And I looked at that and I said, I think program management, project management for software makes a ton of sense. You learn systems, you learn processes, you learn tools, and you develop those skills and you can go apply them anywhere. So that's what I started to zero in on, along with customer success roles, because I thought those were kind of, in some ways, the safe role for me. Right. And I did a bunch of customer success in my first job, as well as a bunch of software program management. And what I found was the things that I thrived on were telling people what I could do for them, which sounds a lot like solutioning or sales. It's revenue producing, right? What are the things that I can do for you that are going to make you happy? And I found that a lot of the customer success things that I did were telling people what I couldn't do for them or why something was broken. Those conversations were always very different. And the energy that I got from those conversations, customer energy, just the interaction, was a very interesting balance. And it skewed me kind of to seek a different role in the future. But I never would have made that decision out of the gate because my wife wasn't comfortable with it. And the role that I took, I wouldn't call it safe. It was a very challenging role. The learning curve was so steep. But when I went through Breakline, one of the companies that I was introduced to was Palantir Technologies. And I had been a user of Palantir in 2012 on my Afghan deployment. And I had been impressed by the software when I was building this software program to do big data analytics at Fort Meade. I was like, hey, I actually know a company that does this. Can we do market research? And they were like, I don't know. This is Fort Meade. We build, we don't buy. But it was a great experience either way. But I got introduced to Palantir and had a rocky first conversation with the recruiter. I didn't feel like she and I clicked. She hysterically, and she's married to a friend. She is from Australia. And she's like, so tell me about what you did, in your last job. I'm like, well, I worked at Marfor Cyber in the NSA. I can't tell you what I did in my last job.
It's a secret.
And I don't even know
worry
how to
about it.
approach this, but you have to get comfortable telling your story. Right. And it was one of those first conversations where I was like, man, I got to get better at telling my story. I got to get better at explaining my value proposition to a potential employer. And I have to focus on a couple of things. How do I get this person to like me? Right? How do I make a friend? If not a friend, how do I make an ally? It's so easy to say no in an interview. And I'm guilty of this myself. You can just say no and be like, oh no, this person was wearing like really strange shoes. They're not going to be a cultural fit here. And that's like one sentence. You submit that feedback and you're like, on to the next. If you want to champion somebody, you need to like, yeah, it takes a lot of work. You're investing in this person. You're investing in them. If somebody says no, are you going to stand up and fight for them? That was a thing that we always, in our, interview roundtables at Palantir, if somebody really liked somebody and somebody didn't, I mean, it wasn't like nobody was hitting each other, but there were heated conversations and discussions that were very professional about, hey, here's why I love this person. Here's why I think you got a bad read on them. And the outcome of most of those conversations was that we would essentially do like another screen, right? We would rack and stack all these things. And then another person who is kind of impartial and hadn't talked to them would screen them and make a decision. But it really reinforced for me that what you're trying to do is not just present your credentials, because that's like the price of entry. You must be this tall to ride. If you show up and you are this tall and you haven't put like lifts in your shoes or worn heels, what are you even doing? Like, you're obviously trying to be contrarian, and you need to know it's like you go to talk to a senior officer. What do? You're respectful. You go, to attention, you go to parade rest, make sure your uniform's squared away. In a civilian world, it's the same thing. If this is the requirement for the job, don't show up with less than that, right? You're probably not an engineer, right? Nobody's going to think it's like quirky and cool if you show up in like a ratty old black turtleneck and be like, oh, they're just like really creative. We'll let this slide.
When I interviewed at Amazon, I showed up. Someone told me like, hey, prep for like, you don't have to dress super nice for this interview. And I was in my head because I was just trying to do everything 110% military style. I showed up to my first interview in a suit.
How'd that go for you?
And well, the first guy shows up and he's in a hoodie, a Lululemon hoodie, so it's a nice hoodie. But he was like, "What are you wearing?" It's like, I thought this is what I'm supposed to wear. And he was like, "No." So then in between my first and second interview, because these are all on video, I took the tie off and just opened up the collar. And then the next person was like, "Wow, you really dressed up for this." And I was like, "Oh my God." So then I just kept taking pieces off until my last interview. I was in a button-down shirt with my sleeves rolled up. And
yeah, so this is an
funny.
important thing too, because this is all about cultural fit, right?
Yeah.
When people would ask me when I'd have conversations with them, like, hey, how should I dress for my on-site portion? Or how do I dress now for Zoom interviews? Because I don't think we're getting back to it, but there's plenty of companies that don't do on-site interviews anymore. And you can get a lot of stuff out of Zoom. How do I present myself? You really want to mirror what the people that you are going to interview with are, how they present themselves, right? You need them to be able to see you in their role. That doesn't mean that you need to show up in a Lululemon sweatshirt, as nice as they are. I would recommend for anybody, if you're transitioning into tech and you know that it's not like a buttoned up old school firm, like a Deloitte, a McKinsey, a Boston consulting group, you go to work for one of those companies and you don't show up for the interview in a suit and tie, you lose. But if you interview like a Facebook or a Google or a Palantir, nice black jeans, a button down shirt, right? Roll those sleeves up, whatever you want to do to feel comfortable. You want to be yourself, but you don't necessarily want to wear the t-shirt, right? You'll get to that, right? The person who's interviewing you is doing interviews and maybe they're not dressing up for them. I didn't always dress up for interviews, and I don't feel like you need to, right? you're messaging the culture of the company to a prospective candidate as well. And it's totally fine if you roll in and, you're wearing like a company t-shirt, right? But they shouldn't be. It's about balancing those expectations.
One pro tip that I'll throw to everyone is if you want to look really bougie in the tech world, wear a Patagonia vest, much like Gabe is right now, and that's the suit down in Silicon Valley. So
I my two of my coworkers and longtime friends from the Marine Corps feel differently about this. I think that if you have a vest on, you're always prepared for a narrow breeze, and you're keeping your core warm, so it's good. But this is truly the uniform for a lot of places, and I think a lot of people. So Palantir had this thing called the track jacket. And you got a track jacket when you were hired. It was a black track jacket and it said Palantir, and it was cotton and it was cool. It was comfy, it was zip up. If you deployed to certain places, you got a different color one. If you deployed to places to support customers where it was like real dangerous, you got a different color one. If you'd been there for a while, you got a different color one. So, you've still got like these uniform things, but culturally, I dug that. And that track jacket culture was really strong. The culture that I really bit into was the vest culture, where, when we would go to conferences, and I thought that this looked very professional, right? It was an easy way to brand, to dress up or dress down, right? You could wear a short sleeve golf shirt polo with a vest and it still looked nice. You could wear a t-shirt with a vest and it still looked nice. Or you could have, slacks or jeans and a button down on and throw a branded vest on and be like ready for a conference, AUSA, or pick your major government conference that everybody goes to and displays their wares. And I enjoyed that. Getting my vest and like supporting conferences was a big deal to me. And it was part of the shift. So
awesome.
The shift is when you figure out what you want to do. And I'm almost 41. I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. I have a better idea now than I did 5 years ago for sure, but there's no reason to not be on the journey, right? Unless you have a destination in mind. If you're like, I got to be a veterinarian. Well, in that case, you know what you want to be when you grow up because you're going to go to a lot of school, or, you want to be a lawyer. You go to law school. You should practice law. Otherwise, you're taking an opportunity away from somebody else. But those are all kind of things where it's like, this is what I want to do. For me, I moved into not necessarily carrying a quota, but having a revenue target on my back, having requirements and building something, and had the opportunity to shift from that program management world into actually building programs that somebody else would then manage. In many cases, it's still you, right? Because you're bootstrapping a lot of this. But it was really empowering. And I found that, at the end of a particularly long day, when I was a program manager, I would come home and be just like smoke. When I started doing revenue stuff, I would come home and I'd be like a babble mouth, telling my wife everything that was going on. Like, oh, it's so exciting. We got this meeting. We're doing this, we're doing that. Like everybody was really fired up about it. It was a shift, and that risk shift, right? You go from like really safe. I know that I can do this. The skills that I have to learn are pretty straightforward. At least they're known unknowns, right? You'll learn them and you'll go along the way, to being in a place where you're shifting towards, carrying a quota. You're shifting towards having revenue targets and living in a world where, those things actually matter truly on the business side. I don't recommend a lot of people transition directly into stuff like that unless that's really what they know they want to do. To me, it was really nice to have the opportunity to sniff around, learn the business. I viewed going to Palantir as like getting an on-the-job MBA. I saw the good, the bad, the ugly. Uh, what I really learned was that everybody was working really hard, but nobody's ever truly qualified for a role, right? It's one of the few times when I think you actually can rise to the occasion rather than fall to the level of your training, right? And it's just a matter of how hard you're willing to hustle. Uh, but that was the shift. And, you know, as I think about my journey in the places that it's taken me and where I've been, I've worked in national security on very secretive, highly classified projects that were cool. And these days, I'm running the commercial business for an autonomous vehicle startup. Again, building something where there is technology. So I have, at least I can point to my experience and say, okay, I've seen this before. We have software. We're configuring it for a use case. But now I'm doing it instead of for government, I'm doing it for commercial and working with teams to change culture, to productize, to focus on delivering to an outcome rather than being, a traditional time and material DoD contractor. And it's been super fun. If you had asked me 18 months ago if I thought I would be working at a robotics company right now, I said, no way. But you get to choose your path and you get to design what it is that you do and when you do it. And this was an opportunity for me to go work with a couple of old friends and bring a couple of old friends with me who I'd made along the way. Uh, and it was just too good to pass up. You never know where this kind of journey is going to lead you.
That's really awesome. And I mean, honestly, we could just cut the episode right here. And I think that everybody who's listening would have that was amazing. That was such a phenomenal, just a phenomenal story with some wonderful lessons. And sounds like you practice this a little bit. So, so it's, that's awesome. But the first thing that I really want to ask you, that I'm really interested in, I want to go like all the way back to the start of your story, because I think that this will be a really cool way to kind of start building this theme that I see in your story, which is first, how far along in law school were you before you decided to join the Marines?
I finished my 1L.
And what is the 1L?
It's your first year.
Okay. And so you've already graduated, you already have your bachelor's, you finished your first year in law school. Why did you go into the Marine Corps in the first place? Like what happened?
So you've got to set the scene with the context of the times. This
Mhm.
was 2005, 2006.
Yeah.
And I graduated college in 2004. And I had friends who were leading platoons in Iraq and Afghanistan, uh, or were enlisted Marines or soldiers, and had not a lot of people that I grew up with in my hometown ended up in the military. There were a few, but there were some people I went to college with, and I watched them go off and serve. And I felt this magnetic pull towards service. It was something that I felt I had to do. Uh, one of the things that I remember explaining this to my parents, and my mother obviously was upset. My father was upset for different reasons. He wanted a doctor and he wanted a lawyer, and my brother's a podiatrist, so I'm the disappointment. Um, my mother was just like, "Why are you doing this?" And I said, "Because I think that this is my battle to fight. I think that I have a responsibility as an American, and I would feel like I had shirked my responsibility if I didn't do this. I would feel like I had missed an opportunity to give something, to be part of something that was bigger than myself. And, some of this was probably the boyish ignorance of, I don't want to miss this great adventure. Obviously, war is a very different thing than you imagine it to be when you're a kid. Uh, but there's almost nothing that I would change about that journey. And, I I left law school and I'd played college hockey, and I played college hockey at about 220 pounds. I'd gotten into powerlifting after college, and I was like 245, which is too big for a 5'10" guy in the Marines. I don't care how jacked or chiseled you are. Uh, I had to lose that weight, and I found CrossFit. I was in pretty early adopter, had a great gym in New York, had access to the website, really like understood that stuff, and enjoyed it and dropped 50 pounds to join the Marine Corps. But my path out of law school and into the Marine Corps kind of looked at my mom and I said, look, why not your kid? What is it that makes me different? What is it that that makes it so that the kid who grew up in a different socioeconomic tier has to go serve, but I don't? And, my parents were both hippies, big time anti-war. I don't know that they were really protesters or anything, but they were very opposed to Vietnam and they just couldn't believe that I was going to give up an opportunity to graduate from law school to join the military. But I couldn't do law school until I had served in the military, right? I was doing fine. My grades were good. I was just distracted. I wasn't focused and it wasn't where my heart was. Culturally, I wanted to be somewhere else. So I had to go there.
So going into your, like, I would say, very patriotic decision and almost reinforcing your decision where you have to bulwark your resolve against that of your parents. So you dedicate yourself to this thing, you join the Marine Corps, and then you're almost then on the back end of your career, you're almost forced to exit on terms that are not your choice. And so how did you how did you get to a place where you were okay with starting that process to exit the Marine Corps, even though you had such extreme dedication going into it?
So I think I came to that realization a little more gradually. I knew that I had had some pretty serious injuries. And I think the frustrating thing was how they manifested themselves. When you're in a blast, different things can happen. And, some of them you can point to and say, oh, I'm missing a thumb, I'm missing an arm. I have shrapnel here, fragmentation wounds. I have concussive blast trauma. You don't always know when those wounds are not physically manifesting, right? And I, coming out of that blast, developed a stutter. I'm from New York. I speak 5,000 words a minute and I think 10,000 words ahead. And suddenly I had a stutter. That was not normal. But you live with it, right? You find coping mechanisms. I was drinking like 10 cups of coffee and then like another 8 or 10 sugar-free pit bulls, which were around 2012, the energy drink of choice of all of those of us in RC Southwest. But I was essentially caffeinating myself or like giving myself a ADD medication, right? I was self-medicating with what was available to me in order to be able to do the job. It wasn't until I got home from that deployment and really like came down and decompressed and had the opportunity to kind of wake up one morning and find that my right forearm, all the muscles were fired and I couldn't open my right hand. I thought I just like slept on my arm funny. And what it ended up being was all of this cervical damage from being picked up and slammed down and compressed with all the weight that I had on my body, a pack on my back in the bed of this pickup truck when we got blown up, had damaged a bunch of the vertebrae where all the nerves go out into your hands. So now we have a physical manifestation and I'm forced to confront it. I'm forced to look at the things that are not maybe going so well. My wife wrote me a letter every single day of my deployment. She thought it was super romantic and you know what? It was. And she gave me such a hard time when she was like, how come you didn't write me a letter every day? And I was like, I don't know. Right. And it wasn't that I didn't think about her. It wasn't that wasn't something that was like crossing my mind. It was that my brain was a little scrambled. Right. I wasn't probably thinking straight. And this goes back to, am I going to be economically viable? Right. I did a lot of work and have seen a lot of specialists and have ultimately learned how to like do my best to heal the brain. But in 2012, 2012, 2013 timeframe, we knew a lot less than we know now. I don't have a Purple Heart because I didn't take my 48 hours of light duty. So I don't meet the intent of the Marine Corps' order for the Purple Heart medal. But I'm a combat wounded, medically retired veteran, according to the VA and the DoD. It's a really weird situation. But I knew it was time when I looked and I said, I can keep this uniform on, but I'm not maintaining the standard. I'm out of shape. Good on me. I'm in fighting shape. My dress blues fit these days. But when I retired, I did not look like a lean and mean fight machine. I looked beat up and I looked tired and I was run down. I wasn't sleeping well. I wasn't doing any of those things. And it kind of wore on me until I realized that I wasn't being nice to people. Probably wasn't very pleasant to be married to because I was kind of throttled, right? Most people know when to hit the throttle forward and when to pull it back. I didn't really have any of that throttle control. And that was a result of the brain injury. And I had to learn coping mechanisms and strategies around it. Going from being really excited and gung ho and joining the Marine Corps to that, I think you realize at a certain point, hey, I've done my part. I have played my role in this. How do I move on to the next one and continue contributing? Mm-hmm. And for me, I went to Palantir, right? I wanted to stay in national security and I wanted to stay close to the mission because I really didn't feel like I was done with it.
Do you think that obviously now you're someone who is very insightful and has had a lot of time to think about the past events and form your story and understand who you were then, who you are now? Do you think that in that moment when you were this lesser version of yourself, did someone come along and tell you hey, Gabe, it's time to hang it up? Or do you think that there was a combination of you finally realizing it? Because because I've seen folks who are in the military who the wheels are definitely falling off, but because they are unwilling to then make that next step, they just kind of ride it out and then the whole bus explodes. And so I'm just really curious, if you feel like you were able to really self-diagnose then, and either way, what advice would you give to people to evaluate their careers so when they know that it might be time, even though you don't want it to be, it might be time to go?
So for me, it was probably 2014 and I knew that things just weren't right. I used to get on the bar and do 20 pull-ups. I used to run a very high PFT and I wasn't doing that anymore. I was working out and I was working out hard, but I wasn't recovering. And I knew that something was wrong. And I had this realization when I saw a couple of my buddies who I'd been a lieutenant with, and we had all been, PT studs and challenging each other and had both, all been very successful as company grade officers. And I watched them just accelerate past me. And I saw their resilience after workouts. And I just said to myself, there are people who are ready to take up the mantle and carry the fight forward. And I am not the best suited for that anymore. That was hard.
Yeah.
That was really hard.
That's an incredibly mature way to respond to that. I mean, honestly, I think that most people would just be angry or wouldn't even understand why they were mad. But anyway, sorry, I did not mean to cut you off. Please continue.
No, that's okay. I was probably angry at the time. There are quite a few things. I may even remember some of them that I regret from this period. This was a period of my life where I was probably confused a lot of the time. I was pouring 150% of my energy into work. If you think back to 2014, 2015, this is when the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant kind of surged out of Syria into Iraq and started taking all of this terrain. And the teams that I was on were focused on that. So I remember kind of going through this process. I had a doctor who actually, primary care manager, who actually took care of me and looked at me and was like, yeah, you're complaining about you go for a run, the whole left side of your body goes numb. Like, dude, you got to hang this thing up, right? Like, you can push and I'm sure you can make it to 20 years, but let's put you on a medical board. Let's get you all the appointments. Number one, let's get you taken care of. And along the way, we'll make sure that you get taken care of and that the injuries that you've sustained are covered, right? Uh, and I had a boss who I have forgiven him this trespass. I love him to pieces. He is a wonderful human being and one of the greatest Marines I ever worked for. He looked at me one day and he said, hey, I know you have a doctor's appointment, but you're the only one who understands this brief. And we need to brief this high ranking person at the Pentagon. And I need you to be there. And I said, okay, sir, I'll be there. I'll cancel my medical appointment. And that medical appointment didn't get rescheduled for about 25 months. Because once you cancel one, it's very easy to just be like, oh, no, I'm in the fight. I got things to do. And as you go down kind of that path, right, you realize you're not taking care of yourself. You are not taking care of and prioritizing the people who are around you. And it was tough. I mean, it was very hard. And I think it took a lot of personal kind of soul searching, a lot of work with my wife on our relationship where she would look at me and be like, I need you to tell me if you're having a foggy day today, like a bad day, right? I had terrible migraines and I just wasn't myself. But I didn't always know when I wasn't feeling great, right? My head would be off in the clouds and she'd be like, hey, why didn't you tell me that you were feeling foggy brain? And I'd say, well, I didn't think of it, right? Like it just didn't occur to me. And eventually I think it clicked for both of us. And it was like, man, I'm not being a jerk to her and she's not being a jerk to me. There's just something wrong and I need to refocus this thing. So I had a sergeant major who had been at Marine Corps Forces Special Operations Command before that. And he had taken an active interest in me and I always sought out mentorship from senior staff NCOs. And he said, hey, you know, it'd be really good for you. Let's get you into this thing called NICO and the National Intrepid Center of Excellence for concussion care for TBIs. There's one at Brooke Army Hospital in Texas, and there's one at Walter Reed. There's one at a lot of major military bases, Camp Lejeune, Camp Pendleton. The one at Walter Reed was really incredible. And I had brain scans, had all this work done, all these specialists, and they did a bunch of things for me. I mean, number one, they gave me Botox injections that stopped my migraines dead in their tracks. I slept better. I was like finally having good days and, you know, realized that I was having a lot more migraines than I realized. They got me on a CPAP and it was like, holy smokes. Not only was my snoring really out of control, but I just wasn't getting, you know, I'd sleep for 9 hours and not feel like I was rested. And all of those things kind of compounded to be like, hey, this is not compatible with the life I want anymore. And I've got to make a change. So as I went through that medical board, it was kind of like, okay, the thing drags on. You've been through one, you know, it's a pain in the butt. They are not fun in any way, shape, or form. Strangely enough, it's a medical process that is adversarial, like a legal proceeding. I do not have fond memories of going through mine, but I went through it, and on my way out, as I was in my last like 3 or so months, my then 2-star pulled me to her office and said, hey, I know that you've been killing yourself and I know that you're really close to, you know, the end here. We're going to send you to Wounded Warrior Battalion. And we want you to take care of yourself, take care of your transition, focus on these things. She offered me a job, basically said, hey, come back in. We'll make a job for you, which was incredibly generous. She's also the reason my wife is still in the Marine Corps. We love her to pieces. I won't name drop her either. But she was great. And she kind of took it upon herself to make sure that I got taken care of. And I think as a leader, when you kind of show people the compassion and you look at them and say, yeah, the mission's important, but you're important too. We'll take care of the mission. It's time for you to go take care of yourself. You kind of get permission to shift gears and to start to refocus on what's really important.
For any individuals who are going through something that was very similar to what you went through in terms of battling with this reality that it's time to go. Do you have any advice, like poignant, like specific words of advice for someone who might be in those specific shoes?
Yeah. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you like, oh, it was harder in my day. I walked a mile to school barefoot each way in snow, but this too shall pass. And, I'm not a particularly spiritual guy, but, I think that you don't get assigned work that you are not capable of doing. And you don't get saddled with a challenge that you are not capable of overcoming. You just need to figure out the path. And if you view it as a challenge that you need to kind of rise to, uh, then it's a lot easier to deal with these things, right? I mean, I thought it was incredibly unfair that I got blown up. It was incredibly unfair to my master sergeant who was killed. It was incredibly unfair to the major, the two captains and the two sergeants who were wounded, and the petty officer first class who's now a senior chief petty officer and received the Silver Star for his actions that day. It was unfair to all of us. And I still wouldn't change a thing about that because it made me who I am today. Those challenges, as hard as they were, I mean, let me rephrase that. I would do anything to have my master sergeant back. I would do anything for him to be alive 9 months from his retirement date and get to have the life that he deserved in retirement. But in terms of the things that I did, you got to forgive yourself and you got to figure it out. And maybe it takes a lot of maturity. Maybe it takes a lot of stubbornness. Maybe it takes a lot of bourbon. You figure it out, right? But you go on that journey and you know that you're not going to give up, right? You're not going to quit. And there are a ton of resources if it gets hard, right? There are mentors. I mean, Billy, you reached out to me over LinkedIn, right?
Yep.
You connected with me that way. You were one fish in a sea of people who I have chatted with. And I have always tried to pay it forward because people answered my emails. People answered my LinkedIn messages. When I reached out cold and was like, hey, this is my story. This is who I am. I'm interested in this. You're involved in this. Can we chat? They took the time. And if you're having a hard time with any of this, gosh, worst case scenario, go talk to a chaplain. Best case scenario, go talk to an organization like Commit. Go talk to American Corporate Partners. Go talk to any of these organizations that are laser focused on how to make better transitions for veterans, how to get you into the right job the first time, how to help you think about, how do I want to live my life, right? Those are really important things that are out there, but the most important thing is to just keep moving. Put one foot in front of the other and keep moving.
Thank you for sharing that. And I definitely think the one thing that I will certainly echo for anyone who's out there who's going through that is community is incredibly important. Having people to lean on is incredibly important. And also, like, if you fought the good fight and you served, uh, the defense of the nation will not end because you decide to make a decision that benefits you and your family. And at some point, you're going to have to step away from the military eventually. And so it's okay. Like it's okay to do that. And yeah, that's
Yes.
the only thing that I would tag on to that.
It is a truth as old as time. When one steps out of the line, another shall take his or her place. And it's true, right? The day that you left the Air Force, what happened? Somebody rolled into your job. Maybe not the day, maybe a day before, Maybe you got a little bit more of a turnover. Maybe there wasn't a turnover and you left the binder, but knowing that the organization will endure and that it'll forget about you. Individuals who you served with will remember you and the impact that you had. I mean, that's your legacy, right? Proudest moment of my military career happened a couple of weeks ago. One of my staff NCOs who I'd worked with for probably 18 months very closely, reached out to me and asked me to be his retiring officer. I don't talk to him every quarter. I probably talk to him maybe twice a year. We call each other on Christmas, maybe a birthday call or, some other anniversary throughout the calendar. But I had an impact on him and he had an impact on me. And that was a really nice kind of cherry on top. Actually, he called me on the day that the 5-year anniversary of the day that I retired, to ask me to do this. And you never know where that kind of cherry on top, that closure is going to come from. Right. But the most important thing to do is know that you have to pick up and move on. And if you're, fighting in a untenable position, displace, keep moving.
So once you realized that it's time to move on, you already kind of talked about some of your strategies, which were you knew geographically where you wanted to be. You drew your battle map and understood what's the most brutal commute that I want to do. And then you also explored organizations like Commit and then Breakline. What other recommendations would you give to people who are about to make that transition or are going to make that transition to find success in their journey?
You want me to talk about the big three?
Yeah.
So I've had many of these conversations, and at some point it dawned on me that there are really 3 decisions that you have to make. And those decisions can be made in any order, in any level of depth that you want, at any time that you want. So those kind of like 3 big mountaintops, right, that you have to climb. You can drill down into them as deep as you want and get into the nitnoid kind of details of this, but you need to know 3 things. 1, geography. Does it matter to you? Does it not matter to you? Would you go to Madagascar if the opportunity was right? Would you pick up and move your family there? Awesome. Or are you like me where you had a geofence, right? You knew that your partner was stationed somewhere, had a job somewhere. You wanted to end up somewhere. So you figured out like what was in that space or what my options were. That's geography. You can be as specific or as broad as you want there. The next thing is the sector, right? The vertical, the functional area. Do you want to be in biomedical supplies? Do you want to be in fintech? Do you want to be in national security tech? Do you want to go work for a social media purveyor, right? Do you want to go work for the company that's providing the podcast software, right? Those are all options for you. What do you want to do in terms of how do you want to spend your time? When somebody asks you, what do you do? How do you want to answer that? Oh, I'm in cyber. Oh, I'm in defense. Oh, I'm in software, right? Those are the questions. And from there, you can get into specifics, right? But again, you can be as specific or as broad as you want. And the last one is probably the most important, and it's the role, right? And you have to ask yourself a couple of questions. 1, do I care what my role is, right? Do I care? Do I want to be a part? For me, this was something that I probably said in my interviews that I thought was really cheeky at the time. Like, hey, I would be the janitor at Palantir if it would get me into this company and exposed to the people, working with the people who I had met. And, maybe it was a bit of conjecture and a bit of fluff, but I meant it at the time. And I think that that was really important. Would I have gone and been a janitor? No. Not that there's anything wrong with being a janitor, but I know myself now. And I know that while I don't really care what it says on my business card, in fact, if I look at my business card, it literally just says my name. my number and my email address. But if I go and do this, is it going to be fulfilling for me? Right? Am I the kind of person who's like, oh, got to be a people manager, got to have like a team, got to, want to supervise, want to do evaluations? Am I that type of person who cares what it, or am I, type of person who cares what it says on their business card? Or am I a kind of get things done kind of person where I don't care what you call me as long as things get done? I don't care who gets credit for it as long as things get done. And that's going to help shape what role you choose along the way, right? Do you want to be a program manager, project manager, customer success manager, really one of like the unsung heroes? Or do you want to be the person who carries the flag, up the ramparts and plants it in the enemy position and gets all the glory? Which is generally the revenue producing roles, right? The people who close the deals get to, number one, ring the gong. Number two, coffee is for closers, right? We've all seen the movie. We know the old adage. These are the decisions that you have to make: geography, your functional vertical, and then your functional role. Those three things are like the big blue arrows that you put on a whiteboard and you start to figure out. You are going to change your mind 25 or 30 times a week. I drove my wife absolutely nuts right before she left for Afghanistan because I had so many epiphany producing conversations where I was like, oh, I really want to do this. And she was like, cool, just don't talk about it. Go away, go whiteboard, go think about this. Tell me when you've made a decision and you've accepted a job. But that's part of the journey, right? If you're the kind of person that needs to spin. I'm the kind of person that needs to spin. I do my best thinking when I'm spinning on something. Other people are like, looks like we go left, and they go without a second thought. Not me, but maybe that's you, and that's okay because it's about finding your path. So knowing that you have those three big decisions, if you make those decisions, you can always change your mind later. But I would say this: take the time to get the best decision that you can make made. Because your first job, if you absolutely hate it, let's say you work for like Satan himself or herself, and you're like, God, this is the worst thing I've ever done. How do you get through 18 or 24 months there? Because if you hop around to jobs, you develop a reputation. I can look at a resume and tell you, based on the dates alone, has this person been successful in jobs? Have they been successful in the military? Have they hit the golden ticket billets that I expect for each service, for each, vertical branch, whatever you want to call it? And you get to a point where you can read that, right? But it all comes back to finding the thing that is actually going to make you happy. And this is something I say to every single veteran who's transitioning. And I know I said it to you, Billy. You are going to succeed. You are going to find a great job. You are never going to be unemployed unless you want to be, because by the nature of the things you have done and the training you've had and the experiences that have shaped you, you're going to work harder than 98% of the rest of the population. Those other 2%, you're going to be chasing them and it's going to be great motivation. But you're going to hit the workforce, and the fact that like you show up on time, you don't show up, hopefully you don't show up drunk, you're going to distinguish yourself because you're just going to work harder because you're working towards outcomes, because you've always been an outcome oriented human being. Mm-hmm. And if you're not, well, you better learn, right? But you're going to be fine. And I always tell people this. I say, look, the worst case scenario here, the worst case is you go back to the place where you just transitioned out of and you're like, hi, I want to be a contractor. And they will hire you almost unless you really stink, in which case I can't help you. Right. But they will find a way to carve you out space. Right. You can always fall back on that. You have a security clearance. Great. You can go be a contractor because there's so many damn jobs that are open that are gapped because somebody's not FCI eligible, right? Great. You have the ticket. You have the lifts in your shoes. You can ride this ride. You can learn everything else. If the requirement is must be, Jira literate and, must know Python or SQL, like, dude, go learn it. There's your path, right? So those big three questions combined with this desire to figure out what it is that you want to do are really the key to happiness here and the key to success in a transition.
And so then previously, when you talked about how you wanted a job that had a specific set of skills, and that was also in kind of a known company, you would say that those two things fall under those big three. And kind of, because I think this kind of ties in, where does the skills in the known role and how in those big three, how do those also factor in with your that risk matrix that you kind of were talking about, where you wanted to slide it back and like you at first kind of slid it way safer, but then as you pushed it up, you pushed it more up in your next role.
It's a great question. So first of all, and this is something that I haven't said yet, if you want to go into tech, don't try to go be a manager, period. When you got out of your A school, your C school, your basic MOS school, whatever it was, whether you were officer, whether you were enlisted, you knew how to do all of the jobs that were in your bucket, right? If you're an officer, especially, you knew how to do all the jobs that your Marines or your sailors or your airmen or your soldiers were going to do. You may not have known how to do them as well as they did, right? But for me as a field artillery officer, I could sit down and relatively technical job, I could do all their jobs. That didn't mean that like that's how I should be spending my time. But if one of them was having trouble with reading a chart and operating a chart at the speed that the Fire Direction Center moved at, I could sit there with them and I could train them up and work with them. I could send them to artillery training school in either of the regiments and get them additional instruction to level them up. If you can't do that in your job in the private sector, in tech specifically, you don't belong as a manager, right? And this was good advice that I got at that time. And it was, hey, go be an individual contributor. Go like establish your credibility. Go confirm that this is what you in fact want to do and where you want to be to do it. And from there, cream will rise to the top. If you are truly a leader, if you are truly somebody who people bring their problems to and they're like, hey, help me navigate this sticky situation, help me answer this hard question, you'll become a leader without having insignia on your collar, right? And that is the way that you develop credibility and the way that you will transition from like, what am I doing when I leave and take a job, right? Where I've got that risk calculus, right? I know that I can go be a software program manager. I know that I can go be a customer success manager. If you're a logistician, you can go to Amazon and run a warehouse, right? But you're going to run a shift first. And they're going to confirm that you've got the leadership chops to manage people who, frankly, like unlike robots, people bleed, people get drunk, people have hangovers, people get sick, right? All these things. And then you can move up in the organization. In tech, if you're really good at your job and you're a leader, you don't go from like junior assistant regional manager to assistant regional manager and then like climb the step. You can jump the ladder, right? And I think that a lot of people who have gotten this advice are like, well, I don't, my title means something to me. That goes back to that third mountain to climb. What do you want to do? Do you care what it says on your business card? Do you care whether you're the janitor? Is it just so important to be a part of this organization that you'll do anything? Will you fill sandbags? And this is something that I use with my team all the time. I say, look, if that's what needs to be done, I will pick up a shovel. I'm supposed to be, at the strategic level, thinking about how do we employ our resources? How do we create the most favorable conditions for the business, for the customers, develop outcomes and results? But at the end of the day, I am a manager who's willing to pick up a shovel. And if you are not, then go to like a bigger organization, right? The smaller the organization, the more shovels you're going to pick up. The bigger the organization, the more opportunities for somebody with like seniority or leadership experience or managerial experience are going to be there. And generally, work-life balance doesn't exist. Work-life integration is a lot easier in a big company than it is in a little company where you're a startup and you're bootstrapping.
So when you talk about something that I just want to highlight that I think is really important to tie in your risk scale is for people who are still like, what does the risk scale mean? One way to quantify that is going back to like, if you start your own business, you're accepting a high degree of risk because it's all on you and you're going to be basically doing everything. Startups, relatively high degree of risk. And because you will certainly be busy and you'll be very involved with a lot of things. You're going to be picking up a lot of hats that need to be picked up. And then as you move further away from that, your risk decreases, at least in your job. And understanding holistically where you want your job to fit is very important because then that also determines the amount of risk you want to take up in that role itself.
Yeah. So there's also a direct correlation between the risk that you take on and the potential reward, right?
Mhm.
If you go to a startup or an early stage company where you've got founder level equity or, a big equity stake, if you 10x the value of a company, that's pretty significant, right? And you've got significant equity. But most of those startups are going to fail. Most of those startups are not going to get to that point. You will learn a ton, but are you there to learn a ton? Are you there to make a living? Those are your risk decisions, right? The larger the organization that you join, the more structured it's going to be, the lower that risk kind of scale goes, right? Stable pay, maybe predictable kind of step to climb to a managerial role or a promotion. Um, but as you think about risk, I mean, maybe you've got 4 kids who are all getting ready to go to college and you're like, I am not bootstrapping this thing. Like I need to make the money that I am worth and I need to maximize that. And I need to do it in a way that, makes my spouse happy and make sure that we're filling the coffers and putting money away every month. Right. Or you may say, hey, I really believe in this. I have a higher risk tolerance. Maybe your spouse has a fantastic job and pays all the bills and puts all the money away. And this is just like a passion project for you, or it's the moonshot. You accept more risk or you can accept more risk at that point. Best advice I ever got in a very bad call, guy hung up on me, thought I was wasting his time. He told me, he said, look, your first job out of the military is the job where you go learn all the things that you just don't know and you can't know and you won't know. Even if you get an MBA, there are still going to be things that until you're in a business, until you're deep in the decisions of running a business, you just won't be able to figure out. And that's all well and good. Your second job, right? That's where you take all the things that you learned. That's where you take all the things that you saw that were right, you saw that were wrong, and you shape and you apply them because you got a little bit more experience. Maybe you got a little bit more seniority. Maybe you have a little bit more cultural wasta, and you can actually shape the way the organization grows and functions and scales. That's the focus, right? The focus, and maybe, maybe you're the rare person who, gosh, I spent 4.5 years at Palantir, right? That's a long time. That is the longest time I've ever had a job. Military moves you every 2, max 3 years. That is a long time to be in a job. I have friends who stayed for 8, 9, 10 years and loved every minute of it because it was changing, right? There was variety, but most people don't find that like lifetime company, right? There's not a lot of like those blue chip companies where I was on a call today with a company with 2 guys who were engineering project managers and had been there for 19 years and 24 years respectively. That's not a
crazy.
normal thing. People bounce around a lot, right? And that's just it, right? Part of this too is your loyalty changes. Your loyalty to the military and your loyalty to that organization, knowing full well that that organization will forget about you the day after you leave it, right? They may be like, God, that son of a gun did XYZ or didn't do XYZ, right? Uh, but that's about it. Where, on the business side, you now have to balance that loyalty with loyalty to yourself, right? It's not like the mission, right? Not like, oh, I would never dishonor or disobey the Marine Corps, right? Uh, a company is a company is a company, and it's made up of people, and your relationships with those people are contingent upon the value that you provide. If you cease to provide value, you cease to be valuable to the company.
I think that's something you bring up something that I think is incredibly important and something that I certainly I did not do a good job contextualizing this when I get out. And it's something that I like to bring up in the podcast for people to start thinking about is the military is a lifestyle. A job after the military is a job. Too many people in the military view the military as just a job. And the reason why that is such a massive stumbling block for a variety of reasons, but the one that you just brought up is we feel like we should have loyalty to our job post military because we had loyalty to the service, when in reality, you had loyalty to the service because the service was a lot more than just a job, even if you felt like it wasn't. And a job is after the military is just a job. And so I think I think that is such great advice for people because, I mean, I have yet to leave my first company post military, but if I had not made the realizations I'd made recently, I know that leaving that company would be very hard for those reasons.
Yeah. So it's also important not every company is a bad company, right? Not every company is one where you got to be like, "Oh, it's me or them." The way that you mitigate that is by aligning values. When you interview at a company, ask them, what are your values? What are your mission imperatives? What are the things that like you hold to be the truest and most important kind of statements of fact? And figure out if those align with you and your values, right? Um, I think that that's so important. If you go to a place because you're a cultural fit, because you see the value in being a part of that tribe, right? The tribal nature of tech is real, right? There's plenty of companies that people have called a cult. I may have worked at a couple of them with friends who are also cultists, but that's like what you're looking for. You're looking for community. You're looking for people who you want to work with, right? When we get back to the interviewing question, it's like, would I want to be stuck in an airport with this person? Would I enjoy having dinner with them if like we didn't have to have dinner together because we were on a business trip? Those are the kind of people you want to be around, right? If you hate your coworkers, even if they're really good at their job, work kind of stinks. If you join a culture where everybody's really focused on doing the same thing, delivering the outcomes, being excellent, delivering excellent results to customers, work doesn't feel quite like work. It'll never feel quite like the Marine Corps, the Air Force, the Army, or the Navy, where you're like, oh, we're all suffering together, but this is glorious, right? We get to shoot cannons. We get to do whatever it is that we do, and it's really cool. And we're part of something that's bigger than ourselves. the culture that you build when you get out is important. And, this is something that I fell in on at Palantir. It was really important to me too. It was something that I was looking for and didn't know I was looking for. And it was in the form of an employee resource group, right? So there's a variety of different employee resource groups, but it's basically like an interest group in college, right? Employee resource groups can be parents, it can be uh, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. Literally, it could be anything, right? Uh, it could be veterans. In this case, I fell in on a group called Palantir Veterans. And Dan Rickard, who was a great friend and mentor to me, Dan was running Palantir Veterans. And it wasn't something that like we got a bunch of money for. It was literally something that was like, hey, this is a community of people who have served. And we want you to feel like you have a community of people who have had similar experiences, who understand who you are, where you've been, and what's shaped you. And it was great. We focused on intersectionality between groups. We supported other employee resource groups in the company, and we built a community. And really, I mean, during COVID, when everybody went remote, we had weekly happy hours. And I sat right here and we all had a drink and we had people come and talk. And, some of it was just like, hey, Billy, tell me about this project that you're working on. Tell all the vets across the company about this incredible big data project that you're doing with cancer markers from the National Institute of Health or whatever it was. Fascinating stuff, but it created community. And you can do that wherever you go, right? If a employee resource group like that doesn't exist, guess what? Create it, right? Nobody needs to fund you for you to like spin up a Slack channel, right? You just create veterans at whatever the company is and invite the other veterans who you know. And if like they want to be there, they'll stay and they'll participate. If they don't, they won't. But there will be a place where you can message the values of the organization and the things that you've done and seen and like create that space for folks.
So when there's two pieces in your transition that I'm really interested on, because I think that people encounter a lot of fear in their transition because we're moving from something that is scary to something that we know to something that we don't know. And there were two things that you said that showed that there was some fear for you or adversity. First was as you were leaving, your wife was deploying. So that is a crazy family instability thing that you have to work through on your personal side. And then also when you were going through Breakline, you had this like, oh, am I economically viable or not? And for people who are fearful for a variety of reasons, because I think that can manifest itself in many different reasons as we move from one chapter of our life to this unknown chapter. What advice would you give for someone to combat that like fear that they're making a bad decision or that they're moving into this unknown environment?
Community, talk to people, have somebody that you can bounce your thoughts off of. I had a lot of people who were able to do that for me, especially when my wife looked at me and said, enough. I don't want to hear about your latest epiphany. I just want you to make a decision. But how you come to conquer that fear is really up to you, right? For some people, they don't want to conquer it. They just want it to drive them, right? Fear is a very powerful emotion, and some people operate better when they're under pressure. Some people operate better when they think that they're like, the other shoe's going to drop on them. Some people procrastinate. That's the same thing, right? For me, the way that I looked at this and the way that I managed this in my life was like, okay, I'm going to give this my all. And if I find that I'm able to do this, awesome. If I find that it's fulfilling, even better. If I find that I'm not able to do this, I'm going to cross that bridge when I get there. And I'm going to do the same thing that I did at every part of this journey that was hard. I'm going to pick one foot up and put it in front of the other, and I'm going to keep moving. And knowing that, especially for those of us who serve, and particularly so for those who served in combat, it's probably not as bad as you think it is, right? Is anybody shooting at you? Are you under threat of death? Are you going to starve and go hungry? If any of those things are true, first of all, call 911 because this is like a transition into the civilian world. Second, ramen noodles are very nutritious and very cheap, and you can live on them for a very long time. But there's also programs that are out there that can support you, right? And one of the things that I think every veteran should do, not just when you do like your VA claim and stuff like that, go talk to a veteran service organization. Go figure out who's active in your community. And I'm not saying go drink at the VFW or the American Legion and go talk to vets from previous wars. Although you should do that too, because that's a really great place to create relationships and to meet people who have similar backgrounds in different eras. But go see what those resources are. Tell them what you're feeling, tell them what you need, and I think you'll be surprised what you wind up with. The VFW and the American Legion are just a handful amongst dozens and dozens of organizations that exist today. And how you find that community is really what counts.
I completely agree. I leaned into my friend group very significantly as I was transitioning out because my wife was actually deployed for part of my transition too. So
I recall.
definitely seconding that. I remember talking to you while she was gone. And you gave me very similar advice, which was incredibly helpful. The last question that I want to ask you about your transition before we kind of really talk about like your post transition is you are really, really good at talking about your skill sets and how they apply to jobs that exist out of the military. I don't believe you had that skill as you were transitioning out, but how did you get comfortable telling your story because that's something that you mentioned early on when you were talking about that interview, and then B, how did you start learning how to translate what you did in the military into words that made sense to someone who's never been in the military before?
So, I think some people get the advice to translate your military resume into something that civilians will understand, right? Like you see a lot of battalion commanders, their resumes are like CEO of a 700 person organization. And you're like, I don't know, like profit and loss. Like you didn't go with that, right?
Yeah.
This is different. And it's important to be able to translate your responsibilities, right? It's not just, I held a consolidated memorandum receipt of $96 million and maintained 100% accountability, because anybody who says they maintain 100% is bullshit, right?
Yep.
But those things are important to learn. How did I learn? Some of it was the School of Hard Knocks. That initial conversation, with Palantir was rocky. I didn't tell my story well, and I was very lucky that when Breakline took me to Palantir with all the other cohort mates, I had the opportunity to talk to a couple of vets who were at Breakline, and they championed me getting back for another conversation. They basically went back and fought for me and said, yeah, we get it. You talked to him, but we think he's awesome. And I forever appreciate that. It's an incredible opportunity. How do you learn to have those conversations? You go to an organization like Breakline. You work with them when it's time to translate those experiences into transition speak, right? First things first, figure out what you want to do when you grow up. You climb those 3 mountains, you figure out your geography, you figure out your vertical, you figure out your role. And then when you go to an organization like Breakline or Shift There's a ton of great ones. You then go with a framing, right? You've thought about this. You've thought small thoughts. You've thought big thoughts. You've come to a refined conclusion, or at least an opinion of what you could do or should do. From there, work with professionals, work with American corporate partners, hiring our heroes, all these great organizations, even your like transition folks in your unit, right? You're going to have folks who do transition assistance and access to those folks on base. And it's not all roses and not everybody's advice is good, but go work on a resume and go get feedback on your resume. A lot of times people reach out to me and they're like, "Hey, I'd love for your feedback on my resume." And I look at it and I send it back all redlined. And I'm like, "Hey, if you were applying for a job here, this is what I would expect to see. This is how I would trim it out. This is how I would focus it in." A resume is kind of like those lifts in your shoes, right? You need it to get into the line and to get onto the ride. Then it's all about how you perform in the conversations. It's a gating function. It's not important to me. And I think a lot of people wrap a lot of emphasis around that. It should literally be something that says, "Hey, this person can write well. This person," and we're not talking about essay form, right? Talking about bullet points, concise. Did this, went here. These were my responsibilities. These were my key achievements. There is a rubric that you can follow. What I will tell you is that spelling and punctuation matters. I would never gig somebody for having like weird shoes on at an interview, but if you have a misspelling or a grammatical error in your resume, I will ensure that you don't get a screening interview, because that tells me that you just don't care. You never can prepare that thing enough. And when it's perfect, you're good, right? If you're like us and you worked in places where it had to go through pre-publication review, maybe this is a little bit different. But if you write big paragraph form, you know what you can do? You can pull words out and paraphrase. And it's okay, right? That's workable. Working with somebody who can help translate that experience is key. The one piece of advice that I would give everybody who is building a civilian resume: put your billet in parentheticals, right? If you say that you're the junior assistant to the regional manager, and then you don't put that you were a senior supply sergeant or that you were a platoon commander, right? None of the things that you've listed out that you've civilianified make any sense. You should be able to have something that is dual readable, right? I want to see if you're retiring as an 05 and have never held command, and you were in a field where command was kind of a prerequisite, right? If you didn't, there might be some reasons for it. And you better believe I'm going to drill into it on an interview and understand, right? Did you staff track for some reason? Is it what are the reasons for that? Or are you somebody who just slugged along under the radar, right? I want to see that, and I'm going to ask those questions. And I think that you should, in a resume that has military content that has been civilianized, also make sure that you very clearly list, "I was the battery executive officer for a 6-cannon battery." Boom, right? These are the things that I did. These are my responsibilities. You can say, supervised all of these, events and things like that. But really what it comes down to is, "Hey, I took the battery to Okinawa, Japan. We had a successful deployment. Nobody got arrested. Nobody created an international incident. Nobody got killed." You need to be able to tell that story.
Makes sense. And yeah, I think that it's such a skill. It's such a skill to be able to translate that experience. And the only thing that I'll add for folks is, as you continue to reaching out to people was the way that I really tuned in on being able to translate my experience. As I started speaking to more and more veterans or individuals in tech, they would give me the feedback of like, "Hey, like we don't say that," or "Stop calling me sir a lot. Like my name is Billy. Don't call me sir. We don't do that out here. It's really good practice. And so as you reach out to individuals and build your network, you get practice getting to tell your story in a way that is easily digestible. So that's the only thing that I would add on to that excellent advice. So moving in
Practice, practice,
practice,
practice.
practice for
Yeah.
sure. The so moving into just this like post, like you've made the transition out of the military, you're now in Palantir. One thing that I think is really cool about the Commit Foundation, something that I would love for you to kind of dive into, is two concepts which you mentioned before: designing a holistic life and then work life integration. Because I think that those are really important because, like I said before, the military is a lifestyle. And as you move into that next chapter of your life, it's not you have to now build your lifestyle. And as you said, like you get to choose, when do you wake up? You get to have all of this. You have a lot more control on a lot more areas of your life than I think people realize. Um, so how did you go through that? And what do you think, what is important for people to think about as they design their identity and holistic lifestyle outside of the military?
So I will say this. I think that when you start a new job, especially your first job out of the military, you're going to work your butt off for the first 6 months because you're going to be paddling against the current. And luckily for me, my wife wasn't home. She was 13 or whatever, how many hours away uh, in time zones. And I just didn't, I was able to focus. And when she called, when we talked, I was able to focus because I was able to carve out that space. But I worked nearly nonstop for my first 6 months. I worked so hard that when I asked my boss, I said, "Hey, I really want to take 3 weeks off. My wife is coming home from Afghanistan. I think I can manage this. And I think I can get things into a place where we can take a vacation, reacquaint ourselves with each other, and come back refreshed." He was like, "Good, because I was going to make you take a vacation if you didn't ask for one." Right? You need to get to that point and get over that hump. Uh, but everybody's different, right? I think some people are just going to be workhorses no matter what they do. My wife and I are not very good at throttle control. We don't do things halfway. Uh, but we also just got back from a week skiing in Tahoe, and it was great. We went with her friends, who are my friends too, at this point in our marriage. And I answered 2 phone calls the entire time I was out there, and they both ended up being social calls, right? Somebody wanted to check in, touch base, didn't really have any project questions. They were just like calling to say, "Hey." Uh, you will figure out how to create something that resembles a balance, right? And the nature of balance is that it swings, right? You think about a seesaw. The weight has to be evenly distributed. And even then, if somebody sneezes, it goes like this, right? So there is no such thing as balancing it perfectly. You have to know that it's going to go like this. And as it moves through those lever actions, you're riding the waves, right? And you have to know when to bear down and ride that wave into the trough. And you have to know when to throttle back and take care of yourself. That comes with maturity. That comes with some time and some perspective that I don't think most people have when they transition. And you just have to develop, right? It's the comfort of saying, "Hey, I'm actually doing all right at this job. I can take some time off. I need to take better care of myself." You shouldn't be the person that somebody has to say, "Hey, you don't look like you're getting much sleep," right? Are you taking care of yourself? That's never good in a private civilian company. Uh, and it's indicative of like a good culture if somebody looks at you and they're like, "Dude, are you taking care of yourself?" right? Because it means they care. And it means you joined a culture that probably looks out for people, right? But I think a lot of cultures are very hyper focused on results, 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 and they will chew you up and spit you out, and they'll forget that you were ever there, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. It's a business. It's different.
Yeah, and it's definitely something that I completely agree, because I definitely fell into that boat of, like, my first 6 months at Amazon, I was doing was working so much, it was crazy, and also because it was remote work, I could always work, like, there was no mental separator, and so the thing that I'll tag on to that for people who are listening is you really shouldn't be understanding that balance is really good, and sometimes your work is providing you that, like, juice that you need and giving you that passion and is aligning really well with your values, and then sometimes it's not, and that's okay, and, like, you can find your juice elsewhere in your life, and it doesn't have to be tied with the thing that's also providing you monetary compensation, and, I think that's something really important to understand, um, because you can now make those decisions, which is really amazing because back in the military, you could not. Um, what is something that for you, as someone who is really dedicated to the fight, exiting the Marine Corps, you're now this Gabe the civilian. How did you deal with that identity shift of someone who was in the fight and then left the fight possibly earlier than they'd like to, and now you made the recognition that you had to move on, but how did you start reshaping your identity to just be like, I'm an American citizen who works in the private sector, I'm still tied to national security, like, how do you move into that identity while also having reverence for what you were in the last chapter of your life?
Well, I think, again, you got to put one foot in front of the other and keep moving. And there is only one constant in the world, and that's change. If you are not willing to adapt and to understand the changes that are taking place around you, within you, if you never take the opportunity to feel the feelings and decide how do they make you feel, right? What is the what is the insight that you can gain from an experience? Then you're going to miss out on a lot. And if you do take those opportunities, you will find that you grow from these things. And for me, I just knew that I had to grow, right? Things that I thought, I mean, my wife and I met in the Marine Corps. We both said, we'll do this until it's not fun anymore. And my wife said 15 years, she's still going. Uh, it wasn't fun for me anymore. And it's not that I didn't love the people I worked with. I didn't love the work that I was doing. It's just that the things that made it fun were the fact that, like, you can go and go for a run in the afternoon. You can go to the gym and work out. Like, nobody looks at you funny if you go get a workout in, right? As long as you're getting your stuff done. Uh, the culture of physicality of, like, martial order was awesome. And it gave me great guide rails for the rest of my life. But I also chafed against it in a lot of ways, right? I wanted to sleep in. Who knew that I was a snooze monster? Here we are. I still wake up early, but I sure do love to sleep in. And I never did that in the military. I didn't even do it on weekends because you're just so programmed to, like, wake up,
Mhm.
wake up, wake up. Uh, those are things that you now get to hone. And you got to think about it in terms of what are the things that I can influence, right? Same way you did as a section sergeant, a platoon commander, whatever it was that you did, you looked and you said, these are the things I can touch. This is my box. I can put things into this box and own the things that are in this box. Outside of this box, maybe I can control things here. Maybe I can influence things here, but these things are probably out of my realm and out of my control. You got to focus on the things that you can actually have an impact on. And if you're focused on the things that you can't control, it's just going to be frustrating and you're going to spiral in a bad way.
That's such good advice, especially in a transition process where most of it's out of your control. At least the processes and the things that you have to wait on. It's very important.
Yeah, but the only thing that you can influence in that process is how you conduct yourself.
Of course.
Are you professional? Are you polite? When somebody tells you something that you really don't want to hear and it's frustrating to hear, how do you react? Right? These are things that, I think, and I'm staring at a copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, and I'm not really like a big time Stoic, but I think that when you're going through these transitions, Stoicism has a lot of lessons to learn. And I'll paraphrase one of like my favorite parables is, if you are given a challenge, don't look at it as like this thing that has been done to you. Look at it as an opportunity to bear this challenge, bear this cross nobly, right? And not everything that you have to do is going to be roses and sunshine, right? A lot of it's probably not going to be very fun. They call it work for a reason, and they differentiate it from fun. These things don't always work out the way you want them to. And you can be disappointed and kind of like a poopy pants about it, or you can kind of pick up and put one foot in front of the other and keep moving.
Thank you so much for all the advice that you've given everybody today. It's been really awesome to have you on. Before we cut out, do you have any final piece of advice that you would give to the listeners out there that you haven't already covered?
You are going to be great. You are going to be as economically viable as you want to be by the nature of just showing up and putting one foot in front of the other. You are going to outperform most of your civilian peers. And if you focus on learning and you focus on growth and you focus on being the best at whatever it is that you're told to do, this like bloom where you planted mentality that probably everybody in the military has heard, right? You are going to be great. And I look forward to hearing all of your success stories in the future.
That's awesome. Well, Gabe, thank you so much for coming on. It was absolutely amazing to listen to your journey and to listen to all the wisdom that you have to share with everybody. And for everybody out there, thanks so much for listening to another episode of the Post Military Podcast. We'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.